Hello, everybody, wherever you may be. This is Frank Leone, one of the principals of the 77 Group, and we are doing episode number 9 of our YouTube channel series on communication and leadership. And you may remember every other week, Mitch and I take turns doing either communication on my side or leadership on Mitch's. And it's my turn right now in episode number 9. And I'm going to review in my book, or from my book, chapter 45, which is entitled Short Questions Beget Short Responses, Answer Questions Succinctly. And I'd like to start there by telling a little story that I tell in the book. And that story takes us way back to 1984. And in 1984, in the fall political season, I was living in Massachusetts at the time. Sudbury, if we have any Massachusettsites tuning in. And my wife and I went to a dinner, and a politician spoke there, and that politician was one of the most famous politicians of the 20th century, and enjoyed his talk. And then afterwards, during a question and answer period, I had a chance to ask a question, and I did, and it generally concerned campaign finance and spending on political campaigns. So it was a good question, and he answered it. And he answered it, and he continued to answer it. And he went on and on and on and answered it some more. And I remember standing there and shuffling my feet and being very uncomfortable because I was standing up because I was pretty far toward the back of the room. And, I put my knee on the chair and then put my foot on part of the chair and so forth. And it went on. It seemed like it went on forever. And then there was a receiving line afterwards to meet this Mr. Famous politician. And we went down to that, and he saw me, and sure enough, he recognized me, and he continued right on. And furthermore, he went on about this point. And I remember I chuckled. I said, if this person who was born into political life and is so well known nationally cannot answer a question succinctly, God help the rest of the world. And ever since that day, and let me do the math, that's 36 years ago. 36 years ago. Ever since that day, I paid a lot of attention to how people answer questions in group settings. And I am amazed that over and over and over and over again, there seems to be a propensity for people to take far too much time answering a simple question. And I've thought about why that's the case. I mean, why do even some very polished speakers fall into this trap? And I'm not sure that I have an answer. I have a couple theories, and those theories basically begin with they just want to be thorough. They're afraid they may leave something out, not answer the question as broadly and appropriately as possible. That's one thing. Number two is they may be basically filibustering. The longer they speak, the fewer more additional questions they're going to get, and the less likelihood is they're going to get a question that's going to be uncomfortable or something that they'll answer poorly. And then the third thing is to basically avoid additional questions from that person. The more you keep on talking, the less chance there is for that person to jump in and correct you. And I think we see that a lot when people are a little bit nervous in a communication interchange, that they tend to not want to stop out of fear that the other party is going to catch them. They're going to get a gotcha moment in there somewhere with them. So they're just some of my theories. But the bottom line is that it is something that is significantly wrong, and something that's easy to correct, and something that is very prevalent out there amongst even the most polished of presenters. So as I'm going through my 5 tips, it's going to be understood that I'm talking about 3 different levels of responding to questions here. One involves in front of a big group like I did that night 36 years ago. The second might be in a small meeting with 4, 5, 6, 7 people. And the third might be simply a one-on-one conversation that you're having with somebody else. So understand that we're talking about any of this array of things. That said, tip number 1 is always repeat the question. And that's really critical in my mind, and it's critical for a lot of reasons. When somebody asks you a question, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's in front of a large group, when somebody asks you a question, there's a chance that you misunderstood that question. there's nothing worse than responding to the wrong question at some length, and the other person or a group of people just sitting there and saying, what is wrong with that man or that woman? So if you repeat the question, you are coming much closer to assuring that you got the question right in the first place. That's number one, and one of the positives of doing that. Number two is by repeating the question, it gives you time to process your answer. It gives you time to think it through. And that's very important as well. Instead of just immediately busting in and spontaneously responding instinctively to what you're hearing, you're buying a couple precious seconds as you're repeating it in order to move forward. And the third is, in a group, or even in a small group or in front of a large group, maybe somebody didn't hear the question, or maybe they didn't process it right. Maybe you heard it correctly, maybe they articulated it correctly, but some of the people in the audience didn't hear it for some reason, or didn't hear it correctly. So it brings everybody back up to an even playing field and up to speed. So that's my tip number one.
Excellent tip. And, you know, Frank, I really love this chapter. I think it really illustrates what we see so much of, and that I am truly guilty of at times. And, you know, it's a real good reset that is relatable for anybody. But going back to tip number one, what if by chance the person asking the question says that you misunderstood the question?
Well, actually, I want to throw in a tip number 1B. Never record something going on YouTube in your house if you have a dog in the next room who's barking.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, that's the new reality here, right? So.
I'm sheltered in place. I have no choice, but
it makes us all relatable because so many of us love our dogs. So no worries.
If you can go ahead and throw your question back to me again.
Sure. So what if the person asking the question says to you that you misunderstood the question?
No problem. That's why I'm asking them to repeat it. I'll say, well, I'm glad that I asked you to repeat the question, and but then what I want to do is then I want to repeat that question again for the exact same reason. So I said, well, I'm glad that I asked you that question, and now I understand. So what I understand you're asking is, only once they agree that what you think they're asking is what they're asking, do you want to proceed with any sort of answer.
Sure. Yeah. Why wander down a road nobody is looking to follow you on?
Yeah, there's no question about that. So if you're ready for tip number 2, I got that one.
Let's have it.
Immediately after you've assured you're answering the right question, immediately shift into brevity mode. And, you know, we're talking about answer every question as succinctly as possible. And answering things succinctly is part of doing that is going into it with the mindset that I am going to answer questions succinctly. It's something that the more you do, the more it comes naturally. But still, you always want to sort of go back to that mindset. It's like a baseball player coming up to the plate. There's certain habits you go through. You could have had 3,000 major league at-bats. You'll still want to go through that same habit in order to get to the optimal comfort level or comfort zone in that batter's box before you see the next pitch. And it's very much the same thing about going instantly into brevity mode, which means, okay, now that I'm going to formulate a response, how can I formulate that response as succinctly as possible and know when to get off the stage, when I'm done, enough is enough.
Right. Yeah, good point. And great comparison too. You know, anybody that stepped in a batter's box gets the comparison you just made as well. I suspect golfers, before they take a golf swing, probably want to go through the exact same routine and find that comfort area there. So and it makes sense also, even if the answer requires requires a complex response, that staying in a brevity mode will help keep the conversation moving and keep the rest of the audience awake and like that. Okay, great. What's tip number 3?
Well, tip number 3 is always ask, after you've done giving your answer, always ask, does that answer your question? Always ask, does that answer your question? And the point here being that maybe your response, you've nailed, by this point, you've nailed down what the question is, but maybe the response is not what they expected to hear, or they want to know something else. Well, out of fairness and out of respect for that person caring enough to ask you the question in the first place, you want to ensure that you've answered their question. So you always want to ask that, and only when they respond in the affirmative that you have, should you move on.
Sure.
So that's my tip number 3.
Okay. Would that perhaps lead to another question or a follow-up question, do you think?
It can, and that's perfectly okay. Because if you didn't answer their question in the first place, you owe it to them, and you owe it to the audience, perhaps, in order to answer it correctly. Now, you don't want to take it to the nth degree. You don't want to have 5 follow-ups, but 1 follow-up or even 2, depending upon how, the circumstances, how many people are there, how important the question is to the greater scheme of things. Like so many other things, everything has to be preceded by the words, it depends. Every situation is a little bit different. Every person is a little bit different. Amen. The importance and value of every situation can vary significantly.
Yep. Great answer. Okay, tip number 4, Frank.
Tip number 4 is take no more than 1 follow-up question, if that. So yes, you've answered the question correctly. And again, I'm thinking in terms of a big group, public presentation, or in some instances, a small meeting. But you've answered a question to the satisfaction of the person asking the question. Then that person may want to come back with another question. Well, if you feel there are other people in the room that have other questions, then it behooves you to be careful about taking that second question. And if you've taken a second question, to be ultra vigilant about taking any more questions. How do you deal with that when it comes up? You just basically have to say in the nicest possible way, I really appreciate your question. But there are a lot of other people in the room, want to give them a chance. That said, my email address, frank@77grp.com, 77group.com. Send me an email with your question, and I promise you I will get back to you on it. So you never want to short circuit or eliminate the person, but you have to strike a balance between that person's thirst for knowledge and information from you and the overall thirst for information from you from the larger group in the room.
Sure, makes perfect sense. All right, great. Frank, tip number 5, what do you got?
Tip number 5, and I can do 50 tips on this topic, but tip number 5, and the last one for today, is if at all possible, remain available after a public presentation. And the point here is all too often people go running out of the room, and people have questions for them, and it's too late. Now, among other things, one thing that if I'm ever giving a presentation to a large group, or whenever I give a presentation to a large group, I want that group to know that if they have questions for me, this is how they can ask those questions. This is my email address. Send me an email, and it is my policy to answer each and every question that comes up that anybody asks, because if somebody cares enough for my opinion, I'm going to find that extra little bit of time to give them a response, to say nothing of the fact that that's how you build success in a career. That's how you build success in a life, is brick by brick by brick by brick. Every little 1 minute that you take doing this, doing that, doing something for somebody else that helps them, the cumulative effect of that is enormous. It has certainly made a big difference in my career. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I'd do it 5 times as much as I have, as Ashley did in the past. So that's important. I want to add something else as well, a little lesson that I learned, a 30-second anecdote. Back in around 1980 or so, I was working at the Rand Corporation. In those days, running was, all the rage. And I had my good friend at Rand, Roger Dodger, if you're out there listening, shout out to you. And we ran every single day at 12 noon in Palisades Park out in Santa Monica. We were avid runners. We ran in all the 10K races and half marathons. I ran in a marathon at one point. And I remember that I was at a meeting of our project that I was part of, staff, And somebody really got upset at me at one point and said, one thing I really don't like about you is that at the end of every meeting, you go running out of here. You never stay around to discuss things afterwards. Well, the staff meetings were always from 11 to 12, and Roger and I ran at 12 o'clock. It was 12:01, and poor Roger's waiting for me, and I'm out of there. I didn't really realize that that was offensive to somebody, perhaps to multiple people, and that I basically learned a lesson the hard way in that respect is no matter how busy you are, no matter how important you are or think you are, really don't look like you're trying to leave things as quickly as possible if you're too important for the people that are in the room with you, whether it's 500 people or whether it's 5 people. So I think that's an important lesson that I learned as well, and really backs up tip number 5 is to always remain available in the room if at all possible.
That is such great advice, I think, as a professional and in life, period, to do the things necessary to support the people around you more than, feeding your own ego or anything else. And people remember the time that you spend with them more than a wonderful presentation or anything. One-on-one time means everything. So great tip there, Frank. Anything else to wrap things up after your 5 awesome tips this week, Frank?
I just want to say, looking at Mr. Leadership himself here on the screen, is that what I just talked about is so germane to being a good leader as well.
Amen.
And if I may cross-fertilize for a second, it's not just being a good communicator, being available to communicate, but if you're a good leader, you cannot be above the people that you're around and that you're serving. You have to be there for them when they need you.
100% correct. And we'll in a episode coming up, we're going to talk about that exactly. And that's why we brought all this together. Communication, leadership, the two marry together so well, and they are critical pillars for successful individuals, both professionally and personally. All right, so that is the end of our tip presentation for this week. Just want to let you know next week's topic, I will take the lead, and we'll be talking about leadership. And from chapter 50 of my book, I'll be talking about improvise, adapt, overcome. That's coming up next week. We try to post these each week on YouTube Sunday night. And of course, we ask that if you like what you see, hit the like button, send us a comment, and remember, each week we award the winning question of each week. So, and also don't forget to subscribe. And with that, Frank, do we have a winner for the question of the week this week?
Well, of course we do. And this week it is Jane R. from Maine. Had to go the absolute opposite tip of the country from where I'm sitting right now to respond to Jane's question. And Jane asked me, in terms of brevity, the question that she basically asked is sometimes, I bet I have it written right here, is it not true that sometimes you can be too brief and give the other party the impression that you really don't care to answer their question? And my basic response to that, Jane, if you're out there listening to this, and again, you are encouraged and welcome to give me an email and set up a 15-minute or so call so we can talk about anything in these topics you would like to. But the basic answer is yes. Like everything else, is my favorite word. One of my favorite words. I have a lot of favorite words. One of my favorite words in the English language is balance. Yes, at times you can be too brief to the point of being curt and dismissive.
Right.
And at times you can be much too loquacious and go on for much too long and please nobody. So yes, there is a sense of balance, and that sense of balance you basically pick up over time.
Excellent.
So thank you, Jane.
Yes, thank you, Jane. And I bet it's cooler in Maine than it is here near Fresno today. So thanks for watching and being a part of our YouTube experience. And Frank quickly alluded to the award that we give to each week's question of the week, you get a free 15 minutes with the subject matter expert. In this case, communication. Jane, I encourage you to contact Frank at 77grp.com. Let him know you're out there so you can get something set up and have personal one-on-one with Frank. And also, each week as we start to wind things down, we like to leave you with a little something with regard to our personal thought of the week or thought of the day. And I'd like to start by just saying, as you go about your business, go about your life, professionally, personally, just be yourself, because who you are is enough. And when you try to be somebody you're not, everybody around you is going to figure that out over time, and you'll be exposed and you'll lose a lot of credibility. So who you are is enough to impress. Remember that, be yourself, and be a winner because of that. Thanks. Back to you, Frank.
Okay, good point. Excellent, as always, excellent point, Mitch. Appreciate that. And my personal thought to end episode number 9 really takes me back to when I believe I was about 15 years old. And I've always find this really remarkable in that in many respects, at least at this moment when I was 15, I think I had more wisdom than I do, 6 decades later here. But I remember very clearly early one evening sitting in the living room of our home in West Hempstead, New York on Long Island. And my parents, I'm an only child, my parents were chatting, and I was reading a newspaper and they were on the other side of the room, but they're in the same room. And they were sort of talking about somebody that they knew that was supposedly their friend. And they were really sort of questioning that person's motives and sort of saying negative things about that person. And my parents were wonderful people. I love them both. I love them both dearly. But I had heard that talk before. And finally, I basically blurted out something that I'm surprised that I said at that tender age. But I said, enough of this, Mom and Dad. I would much, much rather be burned because I believed in somebody when I shouldn't than not believe in somebody that I should, and therefore jeopardize my friendship and relationship with them. And I really feel that I've carried that philosophy with me through the course of my life. And I'm really, sometimes, even at that tender age, you can see things in adults that strike you as this is simply wrong. Give them the benefit of the doubt. So that is my personal thought for this week. And for anybody looking forward 2 weeks from now to episode number 11, that's entitled Play to Your Biorhythms. And I have a nice little anecdote to start off that one as well. So join me again in 2 weeks, and obviously join Mitch again next week. So back to you, Mitch.
Hey, thanks, Frank. And as always, it's great, salient and thoughtful advice there. It's all about the relationships we can make and maintain. That's what really brings us riches, I think, in life. So excellent point there. All right, everybody. Well, that does it for episode 9 here on the 77 group. Again, we love your engagement. We love all the comments. We try to get to each one with a salient and fruitful response. So please keep those coming. Keep watching. Subscribe so you get alerts so you don't miss any of the content. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week right here on the 77 group. Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.